right.
So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. As mentioned earlier, we know it's a bit stormy outside today, so if we do lose connection, just please either email me or write in the chat box that you lost connection or that you can no longer hear us. So this coach socialization series was started because we wanted to be able to provide a platform for coaches to connect during this time of social/physical distancing. So we really hope you enjoy these sessions and that you take something away from them and continue to learn during this time of uncertainty. On that note, if you do have any suggestions of future topics, please feel free to email me or write in the chat box some ideas. And if you do have any questions throughout this presentation, please write those in the chat box. We will be providing time at the end for a Q&A, and we'll open up the mics when needed. But without further ado, we have Melissa Allen here today from Canadian Sports Center Atlantic, who's a sport dietitian. So she'll be talking to us today about nutrition and coaching the female athlete. So I will mute myself, and Melissa, you can take us away.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Kirsty, for that introduction. And welcome to my home, everyone, since we're all hanging out in our houses. This is intimate, right? Pretty interesting. So, like Kirsty said, I'm a dietitian with the Canadian Sports Center Atlantic. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about nutrition and coaching the female athlete. It's going to be from a little bit different viewpoint than what a lot of us are used to talking about, but I think that's pretty exciting because there's some pretty interesting research coming out right now around female athletes. And you guys are all coaches, so you get to hang out with them a lot. So with no further ado, we'll just dig right in. So as you can see, I thought the first thing I'd do is talk about like females in sport and the fact that particularly with like Canadians in sport, and this graph shows more from the Olympics, you can see, if you look at it, it has all the different Olympics, like the winter and the summer. Just let me minimize this here so I can see. If you look at the Rio Olympic Games, the summer ones, the pink, the light pink, that'll show how many, the percentage of the Canadian athletes that we sent that were female, and it was over 50% in the summer games when we went to Rio. And then in 2018, the winter games, it was a little bit less than 50%. I think it was like 46% of the athletes that we sent were female. But the interesting thing is that that was the highest number of females that we've ever sent as Canadians during the Winter Olympics. And you can see that for Rio in the summer, it was the highest that we'd ever sent for females as well. So definitely the proportion of female athletes that we're sending to like the higher level of the Olympics is growing every single time that we have the Olympics. Well, I guess we'll see in 2021 what happens, since it's not happening this year. But something else that's really cool that I wanted to like shout out, just because I'm female and I think it's awesome, is that in Rio, of the 22 medals that we brought home as Canadians, 16 of those were from females. And then in 2018 at the winter, even though there was just 40% or 46% of who we sent was female, half of the medals that we brought home were from females. So I think that's pretty cool. So as you can see, obviously women are playing like a pretty key part in athletics within Canada. They're pretty awesome, I think, anyway. So part of being a female, obviously, is that, shocker, we're a bit different than males are. Hopefully we all realize that. But the crazy part is that in research, this is not something that's been necessarily represented, the fact that we are different. A lot of the research that's been done around sports particularly has been done on like males and young males. And that's who the research is on. And if it was going to be turned into some research for females, the tradition was just to like shrink it and pink it. And then the assumption that that would be good enough for females. But we're going to talk about how females are different today. And this slide shows kind of like the beauty of being a female. I know it sounds a little bit like I'm being sarcastic because we're going to talk about the menstrual cycle. And for a lot of women and for a lot of people, that's never been seen as something that's like beautiful. It's more of something that we viewed as like a hindrance. But there's a big change within research in the sporting world to actually see that this is a beauty of being a female, is our menstrual cycle. And we'll kind of talk our way through that, and obviously where nutrition comes into that, because that's kind of what I love. So just to bring it back again, some of the research that we're doing, that's no longer just about males anymore. We're actually doing it as on females. And I guess if you can think about it, it makes sense, like why a lot of the research was done more particularly around males, because as females, if you're going to take away some of the variables or like the confounding parts of research, you have to take into account that women can be within like different parts of their menstrual cycle. So if you're going to do research on a female, you have to take into account that one might be at this one part in their menstrual cycle and the other one is in a different area. Or some of the women could be pre-menopause, menopause, postmenopausal. So like we have a lot going on as females. So it makes sense why the research has been a bit tentative in historically. But there is now like some cool research going on around the menstrual cycle and like how we can take it from being that thing that we've seen as a hindrance and working towards using it as almost like a performance edge. So what can we do to make it, or how can we work with our menstrual cycles or the menstrual cycles of our athletes to make it actually like a performance booster or a performance edge? It's pretty exciting. I think I get pretty excited when I think about some of this research that's coming out and how we're starting to realize that we can work with this menstrual cycle and it can make your female athletes like stronger, better athletes by embracing the fact that this menstrual cycle happens. So I guess I thought I'd bring this part in because you guys are coaches. So you obviously have spent a lot of time thinking about the external factors. So you're very used to talking about like training load. I hope as a dietitian that like nutrition is a big part of your external factors too. So like bringing the train load, thinking about the nutrition and the recovery side. So those are some key external factors that come into like training your athletes. But there's this internal side of it that we don't talk a lot about. So the internal side would be, again, those like hormones. So if we're talking about the females, some of these hormones that can mediate some adaptive changes to training and how we can utilize those to kind of improve the performance. So like tapping into the menstrual cycle of a female. And I really like this quote. I think it's a pretty cool like overview of like the whole idea. So it's not about like training harder, but it's about training smarter. And so it's working with that natural physiology that we have and not against it. So I can think of lots of instances, and I'm sure that lots of you have experiences either with yourself as a female or working with female athletes, where women have always fought against the menstrual cycle. So whether they try and do things so that they don't have it, or they're playing around with their contraception to try and make it so that they don't get their menstrual cycle at like specific times. So historically it's been about women trying to compress it and hide it and fight against it, and now it's working towards like this smarter training and like actually working with this within our bodies and the system and the hormones that are going on. So just to bring it back to, we can't go too far ahead without making sure that we tap into like what is a menstrual cycle, back to like junior high, high school health class. So the menstrual cycle is more than just a period, because that's a lot of what people think of when they think of a menstrual cycle. So it's actually the period. So the menses or the period, that's the first part of, so that's just like part of the first phase. But there's actually like 2 cycles that go on and they kind of interact and overlap with each other. And one part of it has to do with like our ovaries and the other part is the uterus. And some of what I think is super awesome or amazing about the human body is that everything is always so interconnected. So it's really cool that like our brain and the ovaries and the uterus, these all kind of work together and they communicate. And the way that they communicate is through our hormones. So that's kind of where we're going to start looking into, is that the whole piece of hormones, because they are the way that all these different parts of the female body communicate with each other. So the hormones, I'm sure some of you have seen on the one side of your screen these little pictures of, they have to do more with like red, so the relative energy deficiency in sport. So that's kind of when we're not eating enough food, or when an athlete is not consuming as much as what they need. So that can play a huge part on the hormones, whether they're female or male, but particularly with females. So if a female is not consuming enough to match her needs as an athlete or as a human being, then her hormone levels can be lower. And with low levels of progesterone and estrogen can really impact like their bone health. So increase like bone and injury risk. Cardiovascular, there could be like an impact on their lipid levels. It can impact their like blood pressure, their heart rate. And then from a neurological side, there's like the neurotransmission and neuromuscular. So like the whole balance and coordination thing. So I just kind of pointed out 3 of these things just to show you like how much of an impact having the hormones of a female can have on like very specific things that can impact your athlete huge, like not just their body, but their performance. Because if you think about the neurological side of it, if your athlete's balance is off or their coordination is off, that's going to impact their ability to perform by like a lot. Or if you have athletes that's always getting injured or breaking bones, again, like that's going to impact them hugely. And all of those things are really connected to like the levels of the hormones. And then kind of comes back to the food side of it, which obviously I think is pretty important. So that's just to show you a small piece of the hormone side of it. And just again, to remind us, if you're a female, you probably are well aware of these symptoms of some of the negative hindrance or the negative side of what a lot of us think of when we think of a menstrual cycle. Would be things like, and oh, just to bring this back, this is something most women, so like 80 to 90% of women actually experience some variation of these symptoms within their menstrual cycle. So it can be a huge impact on the athlete. So this is why we're talking about this, is we can do things to figure out how to decrease these symptoms. And these symptoms are like bloating, there's cramping, there's backache, headache, constipation, cravings, moodiness, early fatigue, and then just as like a crazy gem, there's actually some women can really experience like an increase in energy right around the same time that they're seeing some of the other symptoms. And these symptoms usually come right around like your period or right before, kind of during area. So why do we want to talk about the menstrual cycle? Why would a dietitian ever want to talk about the menstrual cycle? There's one of the main reasons, and it kind of goes back to that relative energy deficiency in sport, is that the menstrual cycle is actually probably one of the earliest warning signs that we have that an athlete is actually not consuming enough energy to match all of the energy that they're outputting. So as a female, it's a pretty like lucky tool to have, to be able to see if the menstrual cycle starts disappearing or becoming irregular. That's a big warning sign in our mind that this athlete's not taking in enough energy. And part of that is that once we see that potentially they're not taking enough energy in, we can delve in a little bit deeper and see like, is that because of an eating disorder? Are they doing it on purpose? And that is a whole other conversation. Or is it just more a kind of an unawareness and not realizing how much they need to eat to match all of that activity that they're doing? So paying attention to their menstrual cycle, whether it's them, the athlete is themselves, or the coach, that gives that ability to have that early warning sign to be like, hey, hang on a second. They're maybe not eating as much as what they need to. And another really cool thing about paying attention to the menstrual cycle is from the side of the athlete, is that they can try and figure out what their normal is. So a lot of women, I know I've experienced this with the athletes that I work with, or just people that I know, is they appreciate actually being informed. So, and being able to figure out and get to know their own bodies. So by being able to track their menstrual cycle, they can know what's going on, and they can start to recognize some of these trends and some of the patterns and changes that are going on in their body. And once you can start to recognize that, then you can take some steps to combat or to fight or decrease some of those symptoms that we were talking about earlier. And that can be with some stuff like anti-inflammatory foods, zinc, magnesium, but we'll cover some of that stuff a little bit later. But it's by figuring out what their normal is, or by seeing the trends and the patterns, that they can start to use foods and some other strategies to really decrease some of those symptoms. And then also, just like tracking or talking about the menstrual cycle can help remove some of that stigma or that negative side that we've always known or we tend to know about the menstrual cycle, and it can start a conversation. So whether you're a male coach or a female coach, it just opens that door up so that your athletes can start to talk to you about stuff like this whole big area within their life. Is once you open the door, and then they can start having that conversation with you. And then there's like another whole level that we can think about. Some of this depends on exactly what level of sport you're in. Like, I do realize that as a coach, tracking the menstrual cycle, for a lot of you, that's like put it on the list of like 5 million other things that you're trying to do with your athletes all the time. Like, I do know that you guys are super busy. So a lot of you, some of this is just going to be a conversation and awareness. You can just start opening up the talk around it. But some other coaches who have more time, or as we get higher up in the level of sport and like individualization, like some teams will track like their workout routine every day. The athletes are tracking like how much they lift, what they're lifting. And within that, some of them will also be tracking like wellness. So today I felt like this, or today I slept like that. So some teams are incorporating that whole side of like wellness stuff into it as well. And then throwing that tracking of the period can add another dimension. So you can see like if their wellness, so how they're feeling that day, isn't coordinating with like the training load, so how hard the training is, or their perceived effort, it doesn't match, or their wellness, you can start to see some like discrepancies and start to visualize some like problematic phases within each athlete's cycle. That's kind of like taking it to like a really big in-depth level. And not obviously every team is going to be that way. Like, for an example of a team who did take it that way, but obviously they're performing at a really high level, would be the American women's national soccer team. So this was a team that won the 2019 Women's World Cup just very recently for the second time in a row. And this last year, while they're training and going through the whole competition, the whole team actually factored in like the menstrual cycle of each one of the athletes that was on the team. So every single day they were able to build a profile. So they individualized like the sleep, they individualized the hydration, the nutrition, and the recovery strategies around each teammate's menstrual cycle, which is pretty crazy and cool. So that was one big part that they worked into like figuring out this individualized plan for each athlete. And you can read up on it, but yeah, some of the feedback from the athletes is pretty exciting. The fact that obviously it wasn't the thing that like made them win the World Cup, but they do recognize it as part of a strategy that helped them get to that place. So it's pretty cool. By tracking this, there's teams that are starting to realize how they can individualize and adapt to each woman and like have some crazy performance outcomes. Pretty cool. So just to bring it back to the nutrition, so why would I ever talk about this as a dietitian? Proper nutrition focused around your menstrual cycle can have a pretty big impact. And it doesn't mean that we have to like, each coach has to start tracking it specifically. It doesn't have to go that in depth. Sometimes it can just be an awareness of the athletes themselves. But proper nutrition can enhance their recovery between the training sessions. It can increase their energy and their immunity. It can really help with the risk of injury. It can support some tailored training. So based on like what training you're doing, the nutrition and around the menstrual cycle can really support that training as well. It can reduce the PMS symptoms. And another really cool thing is that during the female's menstrual cycle, during different phases, the body actually taps into different energy systems a bit more. So during like the luteal, we burn more fat metabolizing. So tapping into like fueling your body with like more fat. Whereas like the follicular phase is we tap into more the carbohydrates. So then knowing to like focus more on the carbs. So it's pretty cool the way that we can change the nutrition to kind of match where they're at. But we'll definitely go through each one of the phases and like touch on some of that just to let you know. Here is just a picture of the menstrual cycle just to help remind us all, because a lot of us probably haven't looked at this in a while. So it just shows you like where the follicular phase is, where the menstrual or the menses or the period is, where ovulation is, and the luteal. So just kind of visualize that. And then in my next slide, you'll be able to see that kind of in the background too. But we'll walk through each one of those phases and where we're at in the menstrual cycle, how nutrition fits into that, and we'll cover a little bit of training as well, just to show you how all these different layers kind of interlay with each other. So the first phase, so the menstrual cycle always starts with like day one is kind of like when your period starts, or when the period starts for the female. So it's typically like 28 days long is like the whole cycle, although every woman is kind of different. Same with like how long each phase lasts for each woman, that's going to be a little bit different. And that's why where that tracking comes into play as well, is because each female can kind of figure out, each one of your athletes can figure out what her normal is. So the first phase of like the menstrual cycle would be like day 1 to day 7-ish. So as you can see in like the background, the progesterone and the estrogen are really starting to fall. So the key hormones are really low during this phase when a female is having her period. And this is when you can get like your cramps and your edema. So like the swollen kind of bloated feeling and inflammation. And then also there's an increased potential for illness. I know I've definitely heard like lots of slang about like the period flu and stuff like that. So women recognize that during this period in time, if you're gonna get sick, there's a higher probability that that's when you're gonna get a cold or a sickness, because our immunity is a bit lower during that time. And so some foods that we can think about, really focus on for the females during this period, there's a couple that we want to kind of stay away from. Actually, I'll tell you about a couple more than what's on this list. But salty food, if you think about like salt makes you hang on to fluid more. So if a female is already feeling a bit bloated and hanging on to some water, salty food's gonna like accentuate that, increase it a little bit. So trying to not, eat that whole bag of cheese or chips and all that salty food. And again, also that fried food. There's some pretty cool research to show that like eating like really high fat foods at this time for a female can actually make their symptoms, so their PMS symptoms, like stronger or worse. Some other things just to like mention would be like caffeine for a lot of women can increase their menstrual symptoms. Although if you took away my coffee, I'd probably hurt you, but caffeine can make it worse. Having more stress, so having more stress in the female's life can actually increase the symptoms. Not getting enough sleep, not eating enough like fruits and veggies. Like every dietitian tells you that you should always eat lots and lots of fruits and veggies. Well, right during this time, it's not eating enough fruits and veggies can increase your PMS symptoms. And that kind of goes on to like that section about foods to focus on. So fruits and veggies are packed full of like anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. So those things that are going to really decrease that inflammation that's going on in a female's body. So those fruits and veggies, those nuts and seeds, trying not eating enough of those can actually make it so that a female can experience more of the symptoms. And then what else? And then alcohol can also can be detrimental, especially for a female during this specific phase. So really thinking about like bright colored foods and like fruits and veggies, like tomatoes and your berries, the more like nuts and seeds a female can eat, more like fatty fish and olive oil. Those really like good anti-inflammatory foods are super important and helpful. And then the last one that I really want to like focus on is your iron levels. So something that almost anytime I look at an athlete's blood work, they tend to be low on iron. So this is something that we're always hyper aware of for athletes, and particularly for like females during this time, just with everything that's going on in our bodies, the extra loss of blood, there's a need to really focus on eating iron-rich foods. And then along with those iron-rich foods, including some vitamin C, because that's going to help with that absorption. Kind of that old rule of anytime you have iron-rich foods, having vitamin C, because that really helps you to absorb more of that iron. Because right now, they're athletes, there's a high potential that they're going to be low in iron in the first place. And then as a female going through like menstruation or their period, they're also potentially decreasing their iron levels. So getting lots of good iron rich foods. I'm sure your athletes would love it if you told them just eat liver. Every athlete loves that. And then for the training side of it, so there's a little bit of like a neuromuscular control that decreases. So the idea of like more muscle activation during the warm-up. The body is more inflamed, so that inflammation, so that ability to recover is a little bit more hindered. So really focusing on that protein in the recovery phase after they've done a hard workout. And then there's also the whole idea of, there's some research to show that the maximum training, they can get some good gains from doing strength and HIIT during this phase. And then also that cognitive function is a bit heightened. So strength training, HIIT stuff, and then some more skill-based stuff, because that lowering of all of the hormones like the progesterone, estrogen can actually help increase like the cognitive function. So like the brain's working a little bit sharper. So that's the menstrual phase. And then we'll move on to the follicular. So this phase is kind of once the period stops. So kind of between like 8 and 14 for most women. So as you can see in the background on the graph, your estrogen starts to rise to a peak. So it's like the highest that it's ever going to be for the female during their cycle. But the progesterone still stays pretty low. And so lots of women, for them, this is when they're going to have those days where they feel like a rock star. So lots of women, they'll just have a day when they train or they exercise and they've just felt like they were the strongest and like had the most energy that they've ever had. And it tends to be like, if they start tracking, they'll start to notice that those days fall in this kind of phase. Like a day or two, for some women, a day or two after their period stops, they'll just have days where they feel like if they're a runner, they could run for miles, or you have like this positive alert mood and your energy levels start to rise. There's a lot of like really good feelings and lots of strength going on in this follicular phase. And one really interesting thing to pay attention to is that for some females, there's actually a potential for a decrease in appetite. So I actually ran into this with an athlete not too long ago, where she was noticing a trend of like, sometimes there would just be times when she would not be hungry at all. And as a really high performing athlete, this was something that we're like, hang on, this is something that we need to deal with. And we started to pay attention to the fact that it was coinciding with like a specific time every month when she would just not be hungry, and being aware of it, and then being like, okay, I know I'm not hungry because this is a potential reason, but I still know that I need to get this food. But this is why I'm probably experiencing these feelings of not being super hungry. And some of that can be around like more of like more of an insulin sensitivity. But the crazy part also is that during this phase, there's a need for increased calories and protein. So it's kind of fighting against each other a little bit. And particularly if they're doing like longer endurance efforts, like over an hour, really needing that like extra carbohydrates to fuel them. Because this is when our body is really burning lots of carbs as like the main source of energy. So that's the key things for the food, is making sure getting enough carbohydrates. And then from the training side of it, the recovery can be better during this time. So because there's more muscle repair, and that has to do with some of the estrogen, so the high estrogen side of it. So as you can see, like point number 2, estrogen associated, there's more antioxidants released with this higher estrogen. And so there can be more adaptations and like increased recovery. And then again, like I mentioned, also like the energy levels and the strength levels can be at their peak. So rising to a peak. So pretty great time with lots of energy, except for the last point. Number 4 is one really key one. I'm sure some of you have heard about it before, but there's a lot of interesting research done around like female soccer players and ACL injuries. So right before a female goes into her ovulation phase, so right at the end of the follicular, there's this increase in the I can't even say this word. So like her tendons and ligaments become more loose. So that's when we see that like increased risk for more of your tendon injuries for females. So some of the research has been done around like soccer players and increased ACL injuries, and it's specific to that time in their menstrual cycle. So it's that really high estrogen releases or increases the elasticity of their ligaments and tendons. So again, that's where like knowing as an athlete where they're at in their cycle, or as the coach, and not that you have to change your training, but just being aware and making like small adaptations to fit with the fact that this is a point when you know that there's a higher potential for injuries. Kind of cool, I think, anyway. So that's the follicular phase. And now we move on to the next one, which is ovulation. So now this is day like 15 to 21, kind of for most females. So we're right kind of in the middle of the graph. And so what's happening here is like right at the beginning of this phase, estrogen and progesterone really drop off, but then they do start to raise again at the end of this cycle. And there's some pretty crazy stuff going on within the body. So during this time, the body temperature, so the actual temperature of the female athlete, rises, which is wild when you think about it, because their body temperature is so regular and is so controlled. It's often just within like, I'm sure a lot of you have been checking your temperature a lot in the last little while to see if you have a flu, but so the body temperature will actually raise. Your sleep can be impacted during this phase. So heart rate and breathing rate can actually increase because the progesterone starts to go higher. Blood sugar levels start to get more unstable. And from an emotional side of it, females can actually feel more emotion or more empathy. And or they can also, some females can feel more lethargic. And another thing for some females, especially as they like start to pay attention to where they're at in their menstrual cycle, they can actually start to feel a little bit of pain right at the beginning of this phase. And that's just from like the ovulation that's happening right during this phase. So some things to think about for food, because our blood sugars are a little bit wonky, so less stable during this phase, what do we all crave when our blood sugar is going all over the place? Or what do we eat when we're hangry? Sugar, like sugary sweet stuff. So just trying to stay away from like using that sugary sweet food to like balance out our blood glucose, just because that's that same old idea. Sugary food is delicious. Sometimes it can be good for athletes right before their training because it gives you that really fast energy, but not what we're looking for when we're trying to stabilize our blood sugar levels, because sugary food will rise them really quick and then crash down. So if we're using sugary foods to try and deal with our unstable blood sugar levels, it's going to even make us go on more like higher peaks and lows. So the foods that we instead want to focus on, because our blood sugar levels are more unstable in this phase, is really thinking about proteins and complex carbohydrates. So complex carbohydrates being those ones that don't digest really quickly. So things that are like nice and high in fiber, so they're going to slow down. So whether that's like your whole grain crackers, your whole grain cereals, your potatoes, any of those things that are your brown rice, those complex carbs, those things that are going to digest slower and help stabilize our blood sugar levels. So those are super important just to balance out that blood sugar level that's going a bit wonky at this time. And then antioxidants, again, fighting that like inflammation that's happening. And then around that like body temperature, the idea that our body temperature is changing during this time is around fluids. So especially if you're off doing competitions in a really hot environment. So this is something they've been talking about a lot with the Olympics that are happening. It's going to be even next year when it's in July, it's probably going to be like smoking hot there. So that if a female's in this phase, her body temperature's already risen higher. So dealing with that higher body temperature, so like cool fluids, and really thinking about dehydration, because the temperature can, there's also some cool research to show how temperature can impact a female's performance, particularly females' performance. So paying attention to that hydration side of it. So from the training, this is a really good time to think about like focusing on flexibility stuff. It can take a little bit longer to recover because now the progesterone is starting to go higher. Other kinds of training is like quite beneficial during this time, but some of the verbal processing and spatial can be better, but spatial awareness can be reduced. So there's verbal processing, but spatially aware reduced. So there's kind of two different things going on at the same time. But flexibility is pretty good at this time, so you can focus on that. So that's ovulation. So the next phase, the last phase within the menstrual cycle would be the luteal phase, which is kind of like the 22 to 29, depending again on like the length of the female's phase. So this is when estrogen and progesterone at the end of this phase drop to their lowest point. And when these hormones decrease, that's when all that inflammatory stuff happens, like the bloating and the tender breasts and all those other symptoms that we talked about. So at the end of this phase, so usually like the last week leading up or the last couple days before that, that's when some women start to see some of these symptoms. But before that, in the luteal phase, you can start to recognize a lot of women will have like more of an appetite. They'll start to notice that they have more cravings. Again, their sleep can be disrupted, so they can have trouble sleeping at night. They can potentially have a harder time concentrating, and less ability to be like alert, and their performance can be decreased a little bit. They can get more stressed out. Their mood can be more disturbed, and their breathing patterns can actually be affected as well. So there's a lot going on during this phase for females. So things to think about for food is trying to avoid FODMAP. So FODMAP is a bunch of sugars that a lot of people have a hard time digesting. I didn't want to list all the FODMAP foods because there is extensive amounts of them, but it's definitely something that you can look into. But there would be like the sugars in a lot of dairies can impact people. Sugars in some of the fruits and veggies can impact people. So there's lots of things on the FODMAP. So anything high sugar and high processed, those kind of will fall in that things to stay away from if you possibly can. But of course, the foods that would be really impactful for a female at this time would be like things really high in fiber. More again of those like complex carbs and protein, plus some more of those anti-inflammatory, antioxidant foods, especially in that last week before they go into their period. Because eating those anti-inflammatory, antioxidant foods can actually fight against some of those menstrual cycle symptoms that they get. So there's some interesting research to show like starting to really focus on those the last week before your period can alleviate or decrease those symptoms that women get. So that's as much as like really trying to focus on good foods that have omegas, like fatty fish and eggs have good omegas. Your nuts and your fruits and your veggies, those are going to have some of your good like other antioxidant stuff. And other things you want to try and get enough of is like vitamin D. So if they're milk drinkers, that's a good source of vitamin D, or lots of the other non-dairy milk products now have vitamin D added too. So trying to get lots of good vitamin D and calcium, that's another big thing that there's some cool research to show increasing your calcium intake can actually help with some of the mood side of the symptoms. So like the anxiety and the depression and the moody stuff. Increased calcium can actually help with that. Some pretty cool research around that. Increasing your magnesium intake during this time is going to help with the inflammation and the B vitamins. So these are all some like really focusing on as many foods as possible that contain these things are going to help to fight the symptoms. And that's where tracking and having an athlete or a female pay attention to their cycle, they can start adding and taking away some foods and seeing which ones have a positive impact on some of their symptoms. And then the more you do that and work with your cycle before you come to big competitions. That way, if all of a sudden you go to like a big tournament and a female is in her cycle where she's going to have her period at that time, instead of it having it be a big disastrous thing, because she knows historically females would not want that to happen. If they had like bad cramps, or there was someone who got any of the other symptoms really bloated, they would feel like that would impact their performance. But if we start to work with like foods and strategies to decrease those symptoms, when you get to a big tournament that's happening at the same time, you will already have all these strategies in place that you've figured out beforehand that you're going to be able to work in, so that it's not going to be this big detrimental thing. And we can actually instead utilize the fact that when you're on your period, and then the next phase after that is when women are actually their strongest. So that once we take away some of those painful symptoms or decrease them, that increased performance or strength can then be tapped in to like better their like they can really use that improved performance to like have a really good competition. I don't know if that was a really awkward way of saying that, but the more we women figure out where they're at, the more they can make strategies to like create strategies so that it's not as big of an issue. So we can actually utilize the power of the menstrual cycle. And so another thing about luteal phase around that whole sleep, because sleep can definitely be impacted, is some cool foods. There are quite a few foods that you can use that help release or have melatonin that can help your athletes sleep better. So whether it's like tart cherry juice or something like that, that can be taken before they go to bed, and that can release melatonin and help them go to sleep. And then during this luteal phase, we actually start burning more or utilizing more of our fat as energy source. So making sure that they get good quality fats, whether that's like flax seeds or, lots of seeds, lots of nuts, good omegas again. So like olive oil, all that stuff. And then from the training side, as much as a lot of females don't feel like exercising, exercising can actually help make some of those menstrual symptoms feel better. And then just like light, moderate intensity exercises can potentially be the most effective for females and athletes at this time. So since we spent all this time talking about why we want to track the female menstrual cycle, or what the benefits can be of doing that, I have some cool tools that I can show you that are out there that can really help. And whether it's just like getting the athlete themselves to track it, and some of them, or quite a few athletes or females already do track their menstrual cycle, so just figuring out when it's going to happen. But there's some newer ones now out there that track your menstrual cycle, as well as give you like tips and tricks on like how you can change your training based on where you're at. They also can give you like recommendations on like nutrition at that time too. And some of these platforms also have a coaching side of it, where you can like the first one I'm going to show you, I'll just go to it right now, the Fitter Women. So the Fitter, this would be the app that the athlete would have, but there's actually a coaching platform too. So this app for the female is free. The coaching platform, of course, costs money. But this is what the athlete would see. So on your screen, starting by like where it says phase 1. So as soon as they open it up, you can see in the top right-hand corner, there's like a little calendar. So that's where it would show them where they're at in their cycle, when their period is going to start. And then based off of that, what they've documented in their calendar, it'll set them up on whatever phase they happen to be on at that moment. They give them a bunch of information about like the physiology, so like what their hormones are doing and stuff like that. And then a little further on the screen, they'll also give them training recommendations. So like what's really good, like what kind of training is going to be the most beneficial for them at the moment. And I'll give them some nutrition tips too, which is kind of interesting, and some recipes as well. And then this app also, there's that calendar on the one side, just shows you, it'll show them where they're at or when they're going to get their period. You can even scroll ahead and it'll predict for them when they're going to get their period in the upcoming months, which can be beneficial for athletes when they're figuring out when their big competitions and stuff like that are. And then of course they can document or log different symptoms and how they're feeling during the period or throughout their menstrual cycle at all. So because the more information they put in, the better it's going to be able to like give them feedback. And then there's all like the latest insights on this app. They're always adding more. So just information about like DOM, so early onset muscle soreness, like how that's affected by hormones. I know they have one about COVID up there right now as well. And then there's tons of like research that's attached to this app just to show you like what research they use to like build this whole thing. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty useful. The coaches side of it, I played around with it some. So what it does is you connect your athletes to the coaches platform, and then you can see where each one of your athletes is in their menstrual cycle. And from there, you can also see like their symptoms that they put in there. So if you're really into like tracking and your athletes were really bought into it, would be able to like figure out where each one is at and start tweaking and playing around with some stuff. And a cool thing about like, I'm sure a lot of females and some male coaches that have dealt a lot with females, when females spend a lot of time together, often their menstrual cycle starts to like coincide as well. So that also helps just to see, often if they spend a lot of time together, they'll all kind of align in the same area. And then the coach can use the fact that they're all kind of in the same cycle to like build around that too. So that's one cool one that's out there. And then another one, if your athletes use Garmin has its own menstrual cycle component to it now too. So Garmin Connect, you can just like, there's a menstrual cycle component where they can enter in where they're at. It'll tell them where they're at, what day, give them some more information on like what they want to be doing during that point. There's lots of graphs that they can see. So like, I don't assume that the fertility window would be a big thing in your athletes' world right now, but for some women later, that would be something that they'd be looking at. And there's lots of information that they can put on there, like their mood and all kinds of flow, symptoms. And again, it'll predict when it thinks your period is going to happen the next time. The more information they put in, it'll calculate the length of their typical cycle, because again, it's going to be different for every woman, and their period, like how long it lasts, that will change too. And I guess one thing I should definitely mention is like, if your athletes are on contraceptives, then obviously like tracking the menstrual cycle can be very tricky to do. If they can tell at all or not, being on a contraceptive changes like the whole situation. But that's a whole other conversation. But if they're not, there's a lot of really cool, and I think Fitbit has one now. So a lot of the companies are starting to recognize that this for female athletes is a key thing, and they're starting to build it into their programs, which is pretty cool. And that would be, I think, most of my ranting and raving. Here are a couple of references. If you get this recording, there are the websites for like Fitter Women and just Garmin Connect too, as well. And then there are lots of other ones out there. Fitter Women was probably one of the biggest ones, but I know there are other ones coming out. They're probably going to do kind of the same thing, but yeah, lots of ability to track and find out information for you and for your athletes.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. I actually have a quick question. Do you know if this is free, the Fitter Women?
That is, yeah.
It is, okay.
Yeah, the coaches platform is a charge, but
okay.
For like the app that all your athletes can use and yourself or whatever, yeah, that's free.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. And that was really informative. I took lots of notes as someone who coaches female athletes. So this is great. Again, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to speak up now or write in the chat box, or you can reach out to me later and I can connect you with Melissa. But this will be posted on YouTube if you want to go back and review it. So just go to our YouTube page and you'll find that and all of the previous coach socialization sessions there. But thank you again so much, Melissa, for this session. And thank you all for attending, and hopefully we will see you next week we have 4 coach socialization sessions happening next week. So we hope to see you there. Thank you.
That was awesome, Melissa. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Natalie.